Okay, for those who don't know me, my name is Milos. I'm the CEO and product design lead at Fleeka. By vocation, I'm a digital designer. This is how it was called when I studied. But actually, it's something that grew to be UX design, and something that I really love. And product design is one of my passions. I have been working in Italy for 6.5 years after and lived in Milan actually, and then decided to come back to Montenegro in 2008. And since then, I'm basically leading a team, Fleeka, that is basically an agency that is dedicated to building digital products. So besides jumping off a plane and stuff, I from time to time try to look after the product design in digital products. And one of these things that I want to talk to you about, as Ante was saying, is definitely not something that is considered to be sexy at all. And that's forms. So I'm really hoping that I'm not going to bore you to death, because obviously there are a lot of examples, lots of things that should be done, shouldn't be done, and so on. And I will try to get a little bit in the, let's say, world of forms, just to give you an idea how complex they are and how challenging they are to be built, and to be built in a proper way. So when we talk about forms, Irina was showing an example of a really, really old form and so on, and they have been existing since forever, basically. It was a way of data mining before it was cool, in a way. So it was an idea to standardize the collected information in an efficient and accurate way. To organize it and to make it accessible to a broad number of stakeholders at the time. So when you see the first forms about things that are happening, these are legal documents, or these are some sort of like census data or stuff like that, and that's something that has been done for quite a long time. And if you think about forms unconventionally, this is an IBM machine from 1937. That actually was made to make some sort of automated tests. Those who have been studying in US, I would say, the most, they are very well aware of this kind of tests that are like SATs and stuff like that, where you actually need to fill in very precisely the area of your answer, and then the machine basically just processes your answers, and in a second you get a score of your exam. It's something that I never understood why in Europe didn't take off at a larger scale. But the funny thing about this is that in 1937, actually, IBM made a machine that was processing this. So we're like 86 years since we are processing forms in a semi or fully automated way. So that's something that is pretty fun. So fast forward 86 years ahead, the forms have really evolved, obviously, by becoming digital. They have become something that is smarter, that are conditional, so you don't need to fill in everything. Based on your answers, you're going to get other questions as opposed to somebody else, and so on. So something that was maybe a very long task has been converted in something that is contextual, so that's really good. And you have kind of an immediate error response and correction of the stuff that you do. So, sorry. So, this is what happens when a font breaks when you share a presentation with someone else. Never mind. So forms should be treated as a mini project. So I know how this feels in most of the agencies, that let's just put the form and we'll do it quickly, and what fields we need and so on. But actually, form is a mini project, and that's how it should be treated as such. So we always need to ask what we want to achieve with this form. Do we actually really need this? And this is something which you need to discuss with your clients on an everyday basis, because they would ask for your blood group and DNA sample and everything in the forms that they are asking for. And it's always a struggle to actually ask them and get the answer, why do you actually need that information? It's good, it's good to have, yeah? So that simple answer that we always have is kind of a struggle that we have in agencies to convince the clients that they do not need the form that are asking for everything, but actually to get exactly the minimum information that is needed so that they can process the data and convert this form as a successful one. Next one is the logical order of questions that you're asking to the client, to the end user, sorry, and grouping of the fields that have something in common. Of course, I'm always for trimming the data, and what I mean by that is actually removing everything that is unnecessary from the forms. So in the presentation, I think that my subtitle is going to be jumping below the actual title, but never mind. So I'm hiding the data inside. Yeah. So I'm going to just address a little bit the structure of the actual fields within the form. You know, so when you think about a form field, you're usually just saying like, oh, what is there to it? But this is just a simple text input field that actually has basically a container. It has a label, it has a leading icon, it has a trailing icon, helper text, and placeholder text. In some variation of its form, you can see that the leading icon can be within the actual text field, and that it can be enriched by a validation message, which is usually used for passwords. So simply from one single, let's say, text input field, you can get so many different variations of it. And of course, there are other common types of the form fields that you all know about and should be used contextually where needed. I mentioned before the placeholder, and I think there is always a nightmare of a placeholder being used actually in the forms. So that's something that people really struggle with and what to do with them. So placeholder as a text actually often is used within the actual text field, and there are several issues with it. Basically, designers love the placeholders because they save space, they look good, and but in terms of usability aspect of it, they're pretty difficult. So they're hard to remember in a sense when it disappears. And I think you all experience the forms when you actually type something up and then you don't have anymore the hint what were you supposed to type. So you need to clean all the text and then see what was asked from you, which really makes a problem. Also, the hint can disappear if you have a label on top. And in the last moment of a sample here, you have actually a label, you have an instruction what to do, and you have a validation that has pretty much everything, whatever you type in, and so on. And there's another issue with placeholder text, and this is something that we're not often thinking about. Emmanuel will maybe addressing some of this stuff, but if you think about accessibility in forms, this is the placeholder text in Windows 10. This $25 looks as if someone has actually written it rather than a placeholder. So it's really important to know, that you don't get into these traps of actually doing stuff in a very wrong way, so that, you confuse the end users, and end users are very diverse in this sense. It's also about forms and buttons, and this is something that Irina was saying, talking about the actual hierarchy within the information and where the buttons are actually positioned, how important they are, and so on. So in this sense of actually forcing the user to go forward and minimizing, in this sense, the actually getting back and not giving the same priority is something that is very often confused in the forms. And this is something that I'll show later on in the checkout forms, and it will partially address the question about the airline tickets, because there is sometimes, the friction is sometimes and often actually intentional for the business purposes and aims. One of the things that designers often do is like, oh, my form is too long, so let's do it in 3 columns because we have all this space around the world. But actually, it's a pretty bad thing to do, because that means that you're actually breaking up the flow of the fields, the grouping that is logical. order and so on. And even though your form is long, think about more trimming the actual the fields rather than splitting them in columns, because you're going to end up in one column anyways on a mobile. So you might kind of think about that. So one of the things is also very, very important is to try to mask fields where it's possible for you. So when you start typing within a single button, to have actually a suggestion that is implying what you need to do, that's something that is really helpful. And on second thought, this comes also to an aspect of a font where you're using. You can see now that, for example, here we have a situation where we have IBM Plex Sans actually being used in the first row here, and you have another font that is monospaced font. And if you think about these two, look what happens when you're hovering the buttons. So you need to actually add up the space so that they don't kind of like jump left and right, and also up and down, which is something that is really important. When you're talking about applications that are dealing with a lot of numbers, this is very important. For example, if you look at, you're not going to see it because there's no font. But anyways, so if this was a monospaced font here, what you would see is that this number, the same number of characters, is always taking the same amount of space, as opposed to fonts that are just flying left and right. For some of the fonts, there is a tabular aspect of actually being displayed, which is something that is really much used for accounting, and the last versions of CSS are all supporting these things, which is really good because it's something that we have been lacking for quite some time. Radio buttons and checkboxes is another topic that is very, very interesting, and seems that designers are not really getting them. They are kind of designing radio buttons as checkboxes, so they're round with check marks, and there is a multiple choice with radio buttons and so on. And I think one of the reasons is that basically radio button is often not understood what it is for, and we kind of fall into a trap of dealing with it as an UI thing rather than as something that has its purpose. So radio button has a reference in these radios. I was a small kid, probably many of you actually never lived to see this, but the radios actually had these buttons that are like this to save the station that you liked. So you didn't need to basically fiddle with changing of the station FM and AM all the time. So you would need to save your station at a certain button, which means that basically only one button at a time could be pressed. And this is what a radio button is. So there is no possibility that you have two radio buttons on. It should always be a single radio, and it's exclusive, so it's one, basically exactly one versus none, or one versus more in terms of checkboxes. This is a bad practice of using radio buttons, which often happens with developers usually leaving nothing selected. So there is, if you're using radio buttons, one choice should be selected. There is no choice being selected. That's only reserved for checkboxes. And one other thing that I'm really seeing often with this is also a front-end issue happening a lot of time. This is a radio button. They make this size the click space, the click area. So always use the whole space of a button, because people are not like having a very precise clicking around. So what they do is they're really random. If you start recording screens, what they are doing with their mice, it's definitely not like picking this single little circle to actually pick something, but you need to give them a lot of space. It's also a usability issue, especially when we get to accessibility segment. It's very important that you satisfy the ergonomics necessities. Another issue is validation of forms, and you have been seeing this, you're all users as well, so it's very frustrating to actually fill in the form, and then you have a whole list of things that you've done wrong, which are at the bottom of the page. And this is an easy example where you have 3 fields, but if you have 20 fields, you keep on scrolling up and down basically just to see where is the thing that you made wrong, and you keep on pressing submit until you just finally give up. So it's a very good idea to actually have a validation that is happening on the spot, exactly where the fields are. And one of the things that helps is that you're immediately correcting the issue that you're making. The second thing that can be a little bit problematic that is happening in the forms now, that they don't look really great when you're making a lot of errors because they keep on jumping, becoming red, or you want to switch to another field and then the field before becomes red and so on. So that, to a certain extent, is a little bit annoying. But it's something to be used at forms that are to be concluded while you're actually doing it. This is not to be used as something for forms that can be saved halfway through. Okay, so that's also different. So sometimes you just want to fill a third section of something, save it, and come back to it. So it's not really nice to make it all red after saving. This is also an example of trimming that I mentioned before. So this is the same form, actually requesting the same data from the user. In the first case, we have asking for a name, and then first name, and last name. Then who has a middle name? We always have a problem of actually where it's actually gonna fit. That's one issue. The second issue, you have 3 drop downs basically where you need to select a day, a year, a month, and a year of birth, and then you have these 2 passwords. Which is particularly something that is that I have a pick on. So since the actual demasking of the password was invented, you should be using a single field. But I'm going to get in a second to that. The other one is actually grouping the fields. Okay, so it's easy to throw everything you want from the user in a single screen, a single view. But just by giving this example, you can see how the same form looks easier actually to fill. So that's something that's also important to take into consideration. And there are always actually fields that can go together with each other. And there's a lot of debate going on to how to actually position the labels as opposed to text fields and everything else. So, of course, there are many studies on this and the accessibility segment of this. So, Matteo Penzo has done a research study on the eyeball moving and tracking how we are actually scanning the data about the form. And there are 3 examples that he's passing through. So, this example here is having the labels aligned to the left, okay? So they have a left alignment and you have a form. What are the advantages of this? Is that it's easily scannable. That means that you know exactly what's needed from you. So this is a quick completion of the form. The disadvantage of this form is the size, the width of this. Once you have longer labels where you need something, that's something where it gets a little bit difficult. The second approach is, if you do it right, alignment of labels to avoid this space being enlarged massively. This one is great for the positioning, so everything is close by, but the problem is a lot of disadvantage because we are not used to reading text in this way. So actually scanning this is a little bit difficult to the end users. And I must have here a little comment on this one. Obviously, when you see examples of this in the world, obviously everything is for the left to right languages in question. And if you're designing as we all are actually for the international market, we need to take into consideration what it means for languages that have right to left alignment. So in these cases, actually, the labels are going to this side, so the right-hand alignment is fine, but the alignment is on this side. So it's something just to keep into consideration. If you look at the eyeball tracking and everything on this one that is actually having labels on top, it's the one that is the most successful in terms of completing the form in the minimum amount of time. The disadvantage of it is actually that it gets a little bit longer as a form, of course, because you're keeping the buttons on the top. But it's something that I personally as well prefer. And in conversions, it's something that you can see that numbers add up and are actually saying that you should use this kind of form. You also need to consider as well that many of these things today are being used on a mobile. So mobile is quite a bit dictating as well this kind of very much of a vertical approach. And scrolling, no matter what they tell you, is not such a huge problem. Speaking of mobile, it's also about contextual keyboards. It's something that people forget often to use, especially mobile developers when they're making apps, but also web forms in front end. If you're having an input that is requiring just numbers, put a number keyboard. It's that simple. So it's easier to type in, the buttons are bigger. That applies for credit card numbers, for amounts of money. It can be for a phone number, it can be for a PIN code. Whatever is an input that is requiring a full number field, that's something to take into consideration. And the next one is also touching the point of actually different regional settings and languages. Not to be forgotten. So the leading symbol can be used, of course, for example, for amounts, and this is something that applies to US. Many of the other countries, you have a trailing currency symbol. You can have, obviously, a symbol for lengths or weights and so on. But it's also about regional display of numbers. Okay, we use here a comma, and in a lot of the Western world, a full stop is a sign for a decimal. And that creates a lot of problem, especially in the banking sector and the Balkans interpretation of the US-based codes that are usually developers are never kind of considering this segment to make a localized version and to make a sensitive version based on the regional settings that are there. Second thing is also the calendar. We often forget how complicated the calendar is, and if you ask a developer, let's build a calendar component, it's like basically shooting them and dropping them off a cliff. So calendar itself is really, really difficult, and asking a user to actually input a date, there are myriad of ways how you can do this. Some countries, some languages require to have a slash, the others are using dash. Then there is a pretty much North American style of having a month in front of a day and so on. So a good use for this is actually that you have a pop-up calendar coming out so that you're not actually writing it and imagining what they're asking from you. So when you actually select a day, month, and a year, you're pretty much good to go. Also, it's about the days of the week. So if you think of that, we're starting with Monday. Americans usually have a Sunday at first. In Japan, you're starting with Saturday. So it's quite a different things that you come across when you're building forms, and that's something that is very important. Coming to my favorite of password, and Vlado in the audience knows why, because we always have a little bit of discussion on this subject. Basically, since you have a possibility to unmask a password, use a single field. Obviously, always try to tell people what kind of password you're inspecting. Tell them how strong their password is, and the masking is definitely the key. The thing that can go wrong is that people actually don't press this button to see what they wrote, but they can always reset their password. So in terms of, percentage of wrongly saved passwords, it's really worth, I would say, doing it in this way. There is a little challenge that happens with this eye over here, and that challenge is usually based on password managers that people use and some components that exist in browsers that are basically installed. So usually what happens here is that the component actually gets an additional icon that is not positioned that well, so you can't kind of reach the button that is intended by designer. One other thing is about optional and required fields. Even though this is really fading out in a way from what I can see, it's worth mentioning that forms 5 or 6 years ago, I would say, that would predominantly be like this. You would have asterisks all over the place. Everything is required, and then one thing that is not required doesn't have an asterisk. So it's much better to actually show the optional field, because most of the fields are required, and indicate that it's optional Here it's not really visible, but that's the idea, actually, to keep it without exclamations and warnings before they even started. So if you think about inclusion and accessibility, I'm just like touching the point. You'll have your whole session for this, but it's very important to not to forget as designers to actually show the focus on the field that you're actually selecting. So basically that you can see how much space Apple is actually showing here when the field is selected, how much border is being shown, and that's not only for us, but it's also for people. And here you can hear my extension of 1Password there, killing my form. But the idea about this is definitely that you need to give a user who, especially those who have certain impairness, a possibility to see where they are at a certain point in time. You need to distance the fields properly, and distancing the fields properly applies to many actually things. One of these being also handling the error messages, because often it will happen to you that you have an error and then your form kind of starts jumping, which is not nice. So you should kind of prepare the space if possible, except if you do have really long error messages for each field, then it's not really applicable. The size of the fields are luckily being, I would say, standardized by most of the platforms, so you do have very good guidelines on the actual ergonomic size of the field. Contrast is always a problem. UI designers love grays and love a lot of grays, and the consistency kind of flies among different shades of gray. And the contextual keyboard, as I said, of course, this is something that I was mentioning before, is very important to be there. I don't know if here the computer has an audio.
Yes, but it's not connected to the speaker. But yeah, we can run the video, and I think your voice has enough gravitas for all of us.
Very good. So here there is just a simple, very, very simple example of gov.me website, where we have actually a moment where there is a normal preview of a form, and then we have a separate kind of like environment where people who have who have turned on the accessibility either through some device that is connected and so on, this form actually completely disappears because it's not applicable to them. So this is a case where the form actually becomes, so to speak, an audio form. Let's see if this works.
Aktivirali ste glasovnu formu za kontakt. Pritisnite I držite space bar I izgovorite svoje ime I prezime.
Milošević.
So what happens here is basically I'm keeping the space as I'm talking, and it's actually recording an audio file. This is not my phone. And then it's basically recording for every single let's say, input field, a separate form item.
Just testing.
So what happens here is basically that we've done a situation where 3 MP3 files are being recorded. The next level of that would be obviously speech to text comes back, but as a fallback there is a file. This is being sent to the government, and they can actually hear the whole message by someone who has some sort of impairment and they cannot actually type in. It's just let's say a simple sample of how this can be done in a different way and what the form can be. Irina was mentioning having consistency, and this is something that is really important about forms. So I urge you to put forms as a definitive part of your design system. It's really tedious the first time, but then when you make a base system of your forms, it kind of like it's very easy to handle. So you're not gonna have a front-end developer coming in to your shoulder saying like, what are we gonna do with this when this happens? So it's very important to cover all the cases and have some sort of a base which you can work with and so on, and that really helps a lot to cover all the disabled states in focus, hover, and all these things, of course. and then you can style it however you like. In terms of, it's a little bit touching Milutin's question about whether we are falling into something that doesn't have any creativity to it. I would say that there is a certain aspect that does require creativity. The other aspect is definitely, you know, like reinventing the wheel, and there is a I would say some sort of a border between these two, which we always need to keep into consideration. I have my personal take on material design in terms of forms. I'm not very happy about the floating labels. The floating labels are working beautifully when they're short. As soon as they get longer, the text gets truncated, it gets terribly small, and it gets terribly small even for those who see well. So it's something that, you know, like, it's beautiful, and I think that they opted more for beauty rather than usability in this case. And you can see, for example, this is still beautiful enough, but I'm having the right information and I'm going to fill it in correctly rather than having this as a font size 3 that I can't even read. So in terms of filling forms, I'll just show a couple of examples, and auto-suggesting is something that is really important that you keep in your forms wherever you can. So when you're actually asking for an address, you're asking for some directory that you can fetch somewhere, get kind of like these steps easier to be to the end user, and try to avoid getting them to type in everything. This is an example from a couple of days ago from on my Amazon profile, and so I didn't do anything at this point in time. I just clicked on search. And 18th of June, so in what it is like several days, there is a Father's Day. Okay, so they already have suggestions here in search what you should be searching for, or if you forgot the thing that you want to get. So independently of what you're going to do, they're already actually suggesting you to do something, and it's an interesting thing to do. So in terms of helping people, like helping users avoid re-entering data in forms, this is something that I was addressing before. So browsers are saving stuff, password managers are saving stuff. Keep these forms healthy and give the labels, I'm talking about now code, label them well so that these guys, poor guys in the back, can actually fill in the data properly. Usually it's always the error of those who actually made the forms rather than password managers not working well and so on. So name them well, and obviously fill in the data that you presume that is correct for most of the cases, because that's going to kind of like skip a couple of steps for filling in the forms. One of the things that is really important, this is just a sample showing how this goes about. For example, for males, they tend not to like .me. So there is one library that I need to find why is actually hating .me domain, because it's always asking me, did you mean de? Did you mean s? No, I meant me. But it's good as a hint. It's an interesting thing that it has a list of popular domains for males, and then it's telling you maybe that you made a typo, you maybe didn't write Gmail right or stuff like that. Okay. So I need again to change my phone here in 1Password. The other thing that is happening is also like that is very important is split your forms in steps. If your forms are long, try to split them in several steps. Let users know exactly where they are in the process. Don't make this process too long, but make it easy for them to understand, okay, I need just 2 more steps and I'm going to be done, which is much more different than you have a very, very long form that they feel is going to take them a lot of time. And there is another aspect that is very interesting, and that's multi-device form filling. This is something what's coming more and more in place, and what I mean by that is probably those who are now using Google Meet a lot, they'll see that there is a companion mode and so on, so there are things that are happening across different devices and so on. One of these things is, for example, filling in the forms where they're asking you on this big form to enter your photo of your passport or your ID, or to take a photo of yourself. And you're at your laptop, and it's not really that everybody has just right there scanned version of their ID that they can upload, especially a broad amount of users that are not really that tech savvy on this segment. So the idea about multi-device form is that you can actually continue the process on a device that can do this very easily and then come back to a form. Meaning like, okay, something is gonna come up on a phone or on a device, on a desktop. It's going to give you maybe a special link, or it's going to give you a QR code and so on. You're going to scan it. You're going to go to a specific page. You're going to take a photo of your ID documents or yourself and so on. Do that all. The phone is going to upload it, and then you're going to continue the experience on a desktop device. So that's something that is really cool, and it's happening quite a bit now, and it's helping also the banking system do the KYC, or know your customer segment, where they're actually using also NFC tags from the biometric passports and so on to load the data and to actually fill it in forms, because you have your images saved over there. So in terms of forms, this is one subtitle that didn't get broken. So in terms of forms that matter, what I mean by that is usually the most important forms that we're dealing with on an everyday basis is registration form, login form, and payments, okay, online payments and so on. So everybody was aware, okay, let's make a single sign-on situation, and we'll do this beautiful thing that is a Facebook login, and then there was a Google login, and then Apple said, if you're going to use these logins, you have to use Apple ID as well. So kind of things started piling up. So for this presentation, I actually opened up TikTok to see how their login form actually looks as of today. So this is Waze. This is, yes, for this presentation. Yeah, you'll find me there. I'll tell you the link. Anyways, so basically, there is really a lot, and I think that we are getting to a situation where this will need to get resolved at some point in time. This is madness. Like, we have QR codes, and plus, the second one is not one thing, it's more than one thing. You can use a phone, you can use a mail, and then it gets even more difficult. I'll show you just the example of this one that is a mail. This is a QR code of course, with the phone, and then there is this one that is an interesting segment of UX. So you'll see that email is a secondary thing, so they're pushing on for the phone, okay? But there is one thing that I really hate, and this has been kind of like, I would say, a very often case of usage. That is to put this send code, this digit code, and this send button over here. So you're typing your phone number here, you need to press this, then you're gonna get via SMS the message that you entered like here. So the flow is very strange all the time. So it's something that many actually systems have adopted right now, and I'm not really sure that it makes much sense. You'll see now when I click on send code, I think it's gonna, now it's not also telling me what I didn't do. So this is also an example of that error messages that are kind of missing. So now the send code is activated. I click it here, and then I need to click it here, insert it here, and the validation of this field is automatic, which is kind of a little bit nuts. In terms of checkout forms, I'm gonna address the issue of airline tickets here, where it's intentional, but I'm gonna give it through the example of Amazon. So Amazon lets you do everything until you click proceed to checkout, okay? So this is how it goes. So basically, I have this lock for my electric scooter. I can do whatever I want. I can remove it. I can put a coupon. I can put whatever I want. As soon as I click on proceed to checkout, you will see that the form loses everything. There is no menu, there is no back, there is nothing. This is one-way street. Why? Because they actually say, okay, this is the point. I'm not gonna let them change their mind and go to checkout. So it's very intentional. It's not nuts, it's not stupid. I mean, in business purpose, they have probably done quite a lot of research, how many people from this step actually come back and they say, like, it doesn't matter, I'll do it like next day. And that next day doesn't happen. So they need to send you a mail saying like, look, you left your thing in the cart and well, you need to come back and so on. So they're like, no, you're here, like it's now or never. Do it. Yeah, so go to checkout. And this is what happens with the internal checkout systems. That means basically Amazon is processing everything on their own in a sense of one integrated user experience. If you go to Ring and many other websites, you will see that that basically there is a system that is on the top that is just for the checkout purposes. So for example, they're using Shop here, and that system allows you basically to authenticate just the first time, so they know it's me by a cookie that is there, so they sent me a code, and then once I send the code, I actually have all the billing data that gets filled in together with the addresses and whatnot. So they have kind of like externalized this data, so they kind of like pre-fill the data. I have Croatia because I have my smuggler over there because you're in EU and we don't get anything there here. So if you go to proceed to checkout from a Ring, this is also something that I wanted to show. I would like to just give you an idea how this goes once you're logged in. So you go to proceed to checkout. This actually opens up immediately. I have a card on file. I have all the data being sent to the form, and all I need to do is just go check out. You'll find out one thing that is very important. When you get to these points, everything gets cleared up. So this is the last step where they're not letting you that easily to go back. There is a little back button that Amazon wouldn't ever put, but it's really, really different. It's an experience where all the focus is on this very primary button over here. Which brings me to the next one. So many companies actually have said, okay, why would we actually register users? Many of our purchases are one-timers. And if they come back, they'll insert their billing data. We don't care to keep the data. Bellroy, for example, that does very nice wallets and backpacks and stuff. I'm not doing the advertising. Basically, they have only an express checkout. They don't have registration at all. They opted for that from the very beginning, so there is nothing you can do here. You actually fill in the data, you go to checkout, and that's basically it. Just an empirical segment is that the consumer survey actually has shown that 23% of the users abandon the checkout process once they're asked to register on the cart. So it's 1/4, which is really, really a lot. Lego, on the other hand, actually also has a continuous guest, and then it really guides you through a very quick process. And this is where they get smart. So in many of these forms, actually, they're asking you for everything they would ask you while you were registering, right? So they're asking you for your mail. The only thing they're not asking you is what the password is going to be. So many of these actually, because this can... You gave them so much data unconsciously. They are saying like, look, you entered all of this, like, do you want to register, okay? And you just click yes. And they don't even ask you, many of those who are advanced, for a password. They're saying, as Slack is that you're probably all using and so on, we're going to send you a magic link once you need to get in. So they did basically both things that work. And of course, the filling in of forms with masking can be really nice and can be done in many different ways based on context. You know that if you think about the form field for the checkout for the credit card data, it's one of the things that is the simplest and the biggest nightmare at the same time for most of the online shops. If you see, for example, this is one way or approach how they're seeing it, is the CVV number. You have a contextual segment that is asking, and then the whole card flips to tell you, you know, that 3 numbers, that we are looking for there on the back of the card. You would be surprised how many users don't even know what that number actually is. And so that's, it gets to be really, really challenging, but that's why we're there. And I'll show just a little example of Electric Power Company, State Electric Power Company of Montenegro. We're processing their bills, and they came to a wonderful idea to actually go through an update of their form to say basically, okay, we want to save the data of our customers, we want to save their credit card, but we won't want to register the user. Okay? So it poses as a challenge, as a task to us. So basically what we did at this point in time is that we actually asked them for a mail. So basically once they fill in the data once, they actually make their consent that they want to save the data. Okay? And we asked them in a field, basically, what's your mail? The mail has of course all the validation and everything else. So successful mail arrives to their mail and actually asks them to enter the PIN. Once the PIN is entered, they basically have the saved data. So next time that they're actually addressing the form, they can only press on fill in the data, and they're again asked for the mail, go through enter the PIN number and so on, and that's something how it works. So the token is saved and they don't have the account with the electric power company. Their credit card is safe on the PCI DSS servers, so everything is fine for the security segment. And the cool thing about this is when they log in, when they actually log in like this, they're gonna see their credit card just with the last 4 numbers. They can delete it, of course. They can enter another card. The request is only to keep 1 card at a time. And to spice things up, they also ask to pay in installments for certain cards. So we're also detecting the types of card that's supported and so on. So that's something that is, in a traditional way. And I won't bore you to death. I have like 5 minutes more just to talk a little bit about the future of forms. So they're really getting better day by day. And with new technologies, there are really new horizons to explore. So you have probably seen the rise of the form builders in the last, I would say, almost 10 years, basically. They have really rapidly improved in the last several years. So they're really becoming conversational forms. You don't feel them as forms, but they're easy to implement. You can choose so many logical steps and so on. So there is no coding, and they really work like a charm. What they're managing to do is that basically you have a single question per page for most of the stuff, which is something that is really cool for, I would say, most of the cases that are not very business intensive, and so many applications of these types of forms are actually being used. And you can see in onboarding situations how these things can be. These are all forms. So they're boring forms and a little bit nicer forms that can be used. But it's just simply, I would say, a web way to collect data. The cool thing about the forms that you usually don't have the budget for in your development teams to do, which you have with the form builders, is actually this. So you have drop-off rates, you have everything what has happened on the form, because every single question is one screen. It tells you, like, after the 4th step, everybody abandons. So if that happens, then you need that you can change something. So what really helps is that no code, it helps you improve, constantly iterate on the forms until you get them right, which is something that is great even as a practice, so that you can maybe apply in the next things. And of course, this also applies for between different platforms, so you can see how your forms perform on desktop or mobile, whether they're converting in the same way and so on, and you can really get them to improve. And so they come really in different shapes and sizes, but forms are there to collect data. So after the rise of bots, basically, we have seen a lot of conversational forms going on. Depending, you can call them chats, but basically they're collecting the data based on your inputs. And during coronavirus, this has really exploded, and there have been a lot of chatbots. Everybody wanted a chatbot. They were mostly stupid and frustrating, I would say, as an experience. Or it was really like if this then that type of approach. But they're really improving. So if we're talking about chatbots where some things are being detected, and then you can get an offer, and this offer can actually convert into something that checks in the system and gets availability, is something really nice. But where it gets really interesting is the rise of the AI. So you have one way of conversation of this, but this is fine, and I don't know how much you can read this, but basically the bot is asking for passport details for certain reservation and so on, and this guy actually says, no, I don't have it, like I'll have it tonight, and then the AI says, no problem, I'll message you then, and then sends a message at late night, are you ready to send me the stuff? So the conversation goes on, and it's really smart. And I think this is something what we are going to be seeing as a very, very interesting segment of the, I would say, data collection done in a very, very different way. With all the power of AI now, the contextualization that comes to the actual conversion of the user is going to get really, really interesting, because even now, if you check this is one of the platforms that is using it, is Future AI, basically. You're going to get to the moment where you can actually check on flights that are available, get the best offer from maybe 17 sources, go through the checkout, do the Apple Pay, Google Pay, whatever it is, and you're going to stay in your chat by doing and planning the whole holiday. And then it can, like check on data of other things and so on. And the data will still be collected from you. You won't need to register, and you'll do whatever it's needed. It's the same way like my Alexa on a very, very basic level says, even though I can't use these services, says like, your tablets for your washing machine, dishwashing machine are done. Like, do you want to make an order? Because, like in 2 days, you're going to run out. So that's something that is really interesting. So we're really going towards a tectonic shift in how data is collected. And this is going to drastically influence how forms are being created. So it will be interesting to see the future of registration, of onboarding, booking, online payments, how it unfolds in the next couple of years. And with that, I would like to thank you for your time. As it says here, when I'm not working, I'm probably somewhere in the mountains of Montenegro mostly, so you're welcome to join.